I would like to welcome everyone to this side event on transforming transshipment. We have a full range of experts here who can each speak to a slightly different set of experiences and expertise, but we really want to make this a very interactive session, so we will do a little bit of talking, but we are mostly looking forward to your questions. But first, I will turn things over to Eligio Mastero from the FAO, who will introduce the topic with our only, I promise, our only PowerPoint of the event.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I think this is an opportunity to give everyone an overview of the results of the global survey on transshipment that FAO conducted, so that we can encourage further discussions today and have a bit more in-depth knowledge of the matter. And just, I would like to also thank some of the panelists that have participated in this study, contributing to FAO's work. So, as we know, in COFI 32nd, the transshipment became a matter of concern for the member states of FAO, because it might be creating a loophole for IUU fishing. This was the departing point. Therefore, COFI 32nd requested the FAO to do further work on the current regulations that are being applied to transshipment, the practices, current practices that are around the world that may have changed from the past, and what type of monitoring and control the states are exerting on transshipment. So with this in mind, FAO started a global study that has been articulated in several components. First of all, we have conducted a regulation review to understand what is the extent of the regulation on transshipment around the states, but also RFMOs. Also, we studied a few cases that were published around the world on particular practices currently in use. And we developed an electronic questionnaire to do a global stakeholder survey on transshipment, addressing 4 stakeholder groups: the states, RFMOs, NGOs, and private sector. And this has had a very good response rate. As you can see, we heard this morning from the Code of Conduct questionnaire that the all-time record was 128, if I recall well, members responding to the Code of Conduct. We had over 90 countries responding to the transshipment questionnaire, which shows that there is a great interest in this matter. Also, 14 RFMOs, 4 NGOs, and 3 actors from the private sector responded. And finally, FAO wrapped up the work with an expert workshop to provide further inputs to the draft that was including all these 3 other components. So I want to drive you through these conclusions. The main results of the regulation review is that with regards to the general regulatory framework, there is a desire from different states from going from total ban to allowing transshipment with certain conditions, and that normally RFMOs are focusing on regulating with regards to the species, while the coastal states were regulating with activities in their EEZs. The authorization and notification requirements are relatively common in most regulations, but the VMS and observers as MCS measures are not very well covered. This is some idea that you cannot read probably from your seats, but basically it indicates what I just said, and also it splits the responses onto reefer carriers and supply transfer vessels at the very bottom. And as you can see, supply vessels are really not being covered in this analysis of the regulation review. Main results of the case studies section. There are 5 case studies that we have looked at, and Harry will explain in detail later on. But basically, fishing vessels to canoes, they transfer bycatch on small sizes, large-scale longliners to rig carriers, longliners and purseeiners to carriers of the same flight state, so regulated all in unique fishing operation, fishing vessel to fishing vessels, in which, in this case, fishing vessel definition includes transshipment vessels, and others in which electronic reporting systems and electronic monitoring systems are required for all vessels, including the transshipment ones. Now, the results of the global stakeholder survey with regards to the states, it is generally well covered. There are sufficient regulations in the states with regards to transshipment. They are mainly authorized in what we call authorized locations, because it's not always in the port touching the pier, but it's in an area of the port, meaning it is controlled or considered as port. The typical operation is fishing vessel to a reefer, but in this case, many regulations or states indicated that they have operations to certain vessel types that were not included in our questionnaire, raising further questions for later on the definition of transshipment and the need to do further studies. The highest risk factor appreciated by the states is the operation between fishing vessel and canoe and fishing vessel to fishing vessel, particularly in EEZs, which was surprising. We were expecting maybe higher risk factor in the high seas, but apparently in EEZs is where they think the highest risk factor is happening. And MCS measures are applied extensively, but they are focusing on port inspections, licensing, and logbooks, not on VMS and other MCS measures. With regards to RFMOs, again, generally, they are sufficient covered by regulations, the transshipment. It is normally permitted both in and outside the regulatory area of the RFMO. And the controls are normally to specific vessel types or targeted species. And the typical operation in an RFMO is fishing vessel to reefer or fishing vessel to fishing vessel, the main ones. And there are some MCS measures implemented at a contracting party level, such as VMS, AIS, and landing obligations, meaning this is the responsibility of the contracting party, not necessarily that is properly implemented. And at the RFMO level, the MCS measures are mainly those RFMOs that have port state measures, notification systems, or IUU listings. That is the type of MCS that is following transshipment in the RFMOs. With regards to the results of the operators, they feel that they are generally satisfied with regulations in place and they support the monitoring, control, and surveillance of transshipment, but there is a concern about the economic impact of illicit transshipment having in their operations when they are, of course, legal operators. So they request actions to make a level playing field for legal operators to be properly addressed. There is a need to streamline and simplify administrative processes, which they feel they are very long and cumbersome at the moment. A desire for transparency and new technologies. And there is a concern that records and transport documents are not collected efficiently. And I think here there is room for taking more from the information that can be shared. NGOs, they have different opinions. We recall that there were only 3 NGOs participating at this moment, but there is a desire from going to a total ban to increase regulations, particularly in RFMOs, or increase control. Also, the need for increased observer coverage. Need to streamline regulations to improve the implementation and control. Again, this is a point that comes up frequently. And increase transparency, particularly to provide access to NGOs to information on transshipment. Again, the new technologies to particularly improve strategies on surveillance. Now, the expert workshop, with the understanding that transshipment at sea might be a loophole for IU fishing, if not adequately controlled, and that overall good regulations are in place, but the nature of and extent of illicit transshipment is still unknown, and there is quite an ineffective control of transshipment, the expert workshop provided some general advice, particularly on the review of the definition of transshipment. We have a definition in the FAO Guidelines for Responsible Fisheries 1996, which doesn't include all vessel types or transshipment practices that are currently in place. So there is a need to revisit that. Also to do further study on transshipment, because this current global study is mainly of qualitative nature. We haven't done a quantitative study, and it may be important to understand the levels and risks associated to transshipment. And also to recognize the specificities by region and fisheries, which are constantly changing. There is a need for increased information and transparency on transshipment, and possibly develop minimum standards for control, which is showing to be the weakest point. And they also advise to repeat this global electronic questionnaire every 2 years, possibly to understand how the situation might be changing and to obtain further information. So the main conclusions of the global study include the revisit of the definition of transshipment. As I said, current practices are changing and they may not be included in the definition, and vessel types, and the definitions has a lot of impacts in the implementation of national and regional legislation and regulations, so we need to have a look at those. Understand the diversity of practices and drivers, particularly to know better the extent of the levels of transshipment and the risks associated to it. It is essential, transshipment is an essential part of certain fishing operations, so it needs to be properly monitored and controlled. And in general, there is a quite well understanding on the regulations worldwide, but again, the control is the weakest part, and possibly they would advise to develop guidance for minimum requirements for monitoring and control of transshipment, which includes, of course, notifications and authorizations. Increase international interest on transshipment. It was very clear from the global study that this is becoming an important matter and should be addressed properly. So in general, further work might be needed at global level, possibly through international guidelines, or maybe RFMOs and states should start collecting more information and making their own analysis also at quantitative levels to have a better idea of where we are going in the future. And this is all. I hope I have provided a good overview to set up our discussion now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for providing, in particular, some of the specifics that came out in the surveys and also the expert workshop, which is very helpful information. So what I'd like to do now is turn to each of our panelists. Welcome. We will start with two panelists who can provide more of a global context, and then we'll move through an RFMO experience, and then last we'll look at experiences of two individual countries. We will each have a brief introductory remarks, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion here on the panel, and then I'd like to open the floor for questions at that point. So kicking off our first introductory set of remarks is Harm Koster, who is with the International Monitoring, Control, and Surveillance Network.
Thank you very much. So I'm Harm Koster from the International MCS Network. The International MCS Network is liaising MCS practitioners globally in the whole world. And these are the people which are combating IUU, and they are the first line of defense. So I think it was logical that we were contributing and supporting the FAO in a global study on transshipment. I think to explain a bit the background of transshipment, you should first look to the drivers. There is for transshipment at sea, one of the drivers is economic. Because there are many different types of transshipment operations at sea and in port, and each is dictated by fishing area, target species, market, and logistics. Particularly transshipment at sea is critical to the economic viability of a number of fisheries. Fishing vessels are purpose-built and have crew on board to fish. Therefore, transshipment of catch over the side to transport vessels and taking on board supplies and fuel from supply vessels at sea maximizes effective fishing time of fishing vessels, and thus the economic performance of the vessel. But there are also other drivers, and another driver is IUU. An IUU operator can do transshipment for the sole purpose to circumvent existing controls on IUU activities, and in particular to evade port inspections. Many unauthorized and unregulated transshipment operations, including those in artisanal fisheries, have developed into major economic drivers that severely impact on vulnerable coastal communities and the long-term health of fish stocks. It varies from a culture of non-compliance to transboundary crime, and indeed, criminals, they are also using fishing vessels for their illegal activities. Since transshipment it's not so easy to get a clear picture of what is happening in all parts of the world, we have chosen to do some case studies. And so Alicia already referred to the case studies. And so we did a case study of trawlers, about 100 trawlers, which are transshipping with canoes. Basically, these trawlers have catches of undersized fish, which they cannot really use, and they are giving that to the canoes in exchange for some provision. That was the origin of the bargain, but that has developed massively, in massive transshipments between the canoes and the trawlers. And the canoes, they are taking this undersized, this small fish, and they are selling the small fish ashore. It's a whole operation which has developed, and some people call this a culture of non-compliance. But it is like that. It is very difficult to redress and to correct. That is between trawlers and canoes. We also looked at transshipment at sea by large-scale longliners in the Western and Central Pacific. It is only allowed, tuna RFMOs, they are allowing this only large-scale longliners to transship. Why are they transshipping? They are transshipping high-value tuna, this big-eye tuna. They are transshipping into transport vessels, and they are equipped with special freezing installations to keep the quality of the fish, and the fish should get as soon as possible to the markets. That is an economic necessity. It's difficult to control because, as you know, these longliners, they are operating in vast geographical areas, and these transport vessels are going there also. So it is a big operation. Then we have studied how a flag state is controlling its fishing vessels and the transshipment at sea and the transport vessels. It makes a difference when the transport vessel is also flagged by the same state. So we have seen some states which have a pretty good control both on the transshipment vessel, the carrier vessel, and on the fishing vessel, with observers on both vessels, and with reporting and with authorization procedures, that we took also specifically. Then we did a case study on the experience in the NEAFC area in the Northeast Atlantic. In the Northeast Atlantic, there were some vessels flying flags of convenience, and they were fishing on the high seas for redfish. The countries, all the coastal states around the North Atlantic, they have cooperated together. They prohibited access of these vessels to ports, and so subsequently these vessels were transshipping. Because they took transport vessels. When the NEAFC also blacklisted the transport vessels, and the transport vessels could not land anymore the fish, then the story was final. Because then it stopped. Because at the moment there are no such vessels, and there is a lot of control just to spot them. And so this whole approach by cooperation with all the coastal states was very successful in the NEAFC. Then we have studied Thailand. Thailand is a market state. It is one of the biggest processors in the world of tuna. And as a market state, you want also to be sure from the products which are coming to your processing industry. And I wanted to mention as a good example that now Thailand has equipped the transport vessels completely with VMS and with e-monitoring. E-monitoring, that are cameras on board, and these there are also sensors on the cranes and all the equipment on board. So you know exactly at what moment this vessel is going to transship. This is effective from port to port. I think what we find from the study was the weakest point is in the transport vessels. Contracting party vessels, which I could call legal vessels, they are controlled a lot, and then the transport vessels are also controlled. But there are also other vessels around which are fishing also, and they want also to transship products to bring it into the legal chain. So the weaknesses are in the transport vessels, and I think that Thailand, with the new things which to be fully sure and to have guarantee that nothing is happening with the transport vessel, I think that is a good system to stay with the cameras on board with VMS. You always know where the vessel is, and it is from port to port. Then I think you have to conclude from the case studies that there are good and bad examples. There are some examples which are where there are transshipments at sea. They are properly controlled, and there is a reasonable guarantee that what is landed that is corresponding with everything which has been declared, is recorded and reported to the authorities. But how do we deal with the bad examples? And the bad examples are there as well. In the NEAFC area, there was not any legal vessel which was transshipping. Only the IUU vessels were transshipping. And the Kamalar, it is the same. There were the legal vessels fishing for Patagonian toothfish. They did not transship. But the illegal vessels which were fishing there, the IUU vessels, they were using transport vessels to transship. So they are transshipping to evade control and tracking. The PSMA rules are very clear. The PSMA rule says that you should not allow port access to IUU vessels, and you should also not allow port access of any activities associated to that. That means that transport vessels who are transshipping at sea, you should not allow port access if they have transshipped with IUU vessels. I think that is very clear. Then we have to make port state measures work. The experience in the North Atlantic with the NEAFC was that there was a kind of early warning system. If anybody, the Secretariat, had noted that there was an operation, all the states, all the coastal states around the North Atlantic were warned for certain vessels that they should not allow port access. That worked properly. That can be copied in other parts of the world. In Africa, there is the Fish Eye. It's also a network which is cooperating. We have heard yesterday that in Latin America they have set up a network. These networks can be very useful for early warning. To say that here are vessels which are just operating not correctly. If they are coming to your port, you should stop them. And then I think the PSMA, that is a very cost-effective tool. It is a cheap tool. We should make it work. FAO is now doing a lot of work to do with capacity building, which is good. But I think we need to exchange data, to exchange all the data between all the states involved. That will be a big challenge. And then afterwards, there will be some ports where transshipments are taking place of vessels which are doubtful, and we have to do with some ports which are not following the discipline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we'll hear from another sort of global perspective with Mark Young, who is with Pew. Mark,
Thank you, Deirdre. As Deirdre said, I'm with the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a global not-for-profit organization that works to serve the public, especially trying to solve many of the world's problems today using both data and science. Transshipping being one of those, especially with the work that we do with environmental conservation. Pew has been very supportive of the COFI processes, especially since 2010, and was very actively involved in the work that went in towards the development and implementation of the FAO Port State Measures Agreement. I work within a campaign within Pew itself as the Ending Illegal Fishing campaign, so our work is very much focused on the efforts directed at trying to address illegal fishing to get rid of the issue. My remarks today are pretty straightforward. Introductory remarks are pretty straightforward. I look at it as a countdown. And in 3, 2, 1. 3 takeaways, 3 primary takeaways, 2 things that can be done, and then 1 major theme. The first key takeaway, recognition that there's inadequate controls that are in place regarding transshipment, especially when that activity occurs at sea, because there's few guarantees that all the transfers that are happening over the horizon and out of sight are being reported and observed. Those gaps in oversight do create opportunities for illegal activities to occur, such as misreporting or even non-reporting of the catch that's transferred between the vessels, and potentially results in the laundering of hundreds of millions of dollars. Those conditions can also foster conditions that are very conducive to other transnational crime, such as the illegal trafficking of weapons or drugs or even people. Reforming transshipment is really the last frontier in ensuring the legality and the verifiability of catch and ensuring the complete transparency and traceability in the seafood supply chain. So that's the first takeaway. Second takeaway, maximizing the use of technology today. Securing strong oversight of transshipment is important to protect what we call the good players out there, the ones that are abiding by the rules, and ensuring the ones that do undermine the rules do not receive the value of the fishery and are not able to move or land fish that has been illegally caught. Over the last 15 to 20 years, then there have been substantial improvements in the technology that allows fisheries, monitoring systems, and then also now we're seeing a lot more electronic monitoring, and those need to continue to be used primarily with health, and they need to be expanded, and that needs to be done so as a matter of urgency. The third takeaway, data sharing is essential. While technology exists to track both legal and illegal transshipment, political will, as well as seafood industry support, are needed to ensure that relevant information is shared. There's no single management authority out there, including the RFMO secretariats, that has access to every bit of the information that is needed in regards to having a complete picture of transshipping that occurs. ICs and the EEZs are in port. The form of transshipment oversight must close those data loopholes and ensure that information flows to the relevant authorities, and that includes flag states, coastal states, port states, and even the RFMO secretariats. Next, what can be done? 2 things really here. Support a COFI recommendation that FAO formally initiate processes to inform a technical consultation that will produce global minimum standards, guidelines that go towards managing transshipment, especially transshipment at sea. And then also support implementation of transshipping, what we call best practices as it relates to reporting, to monitoring, and data sharing, so that those type of best practices can be incorporated in both national and regional regulations. Establishment of clear transshipment rules, processes, procedures is essential to ensure that there's a strong, viable seafood supply chain that can reduce the likelihood of illegal fish from entering the market. My last point is one major theme, and that is transparency of information breeds self-correcting behavior. And I'll say that again. Transparency of information breeds self-correcting behavior. That statement can be applied in a lot of contexts, and transshipping is included in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So next we'll it's from the Secretariat of the North Pacific Fisheries Commission.
Well, thanks, Deidre. Yes, I'm the compliance manager for the North Pacific Fisheries Commission, which tends to give me a little bit of a jaundiced eye. I look at things maybe a little bit more suspiciously. However, I think my two colleagues have stolen most of what I was going to say already. The challenges and the risks in the perspective of the RFMOs. However, I will add a few things. Unmonitored at-sea transshipments is a tremendous gap. That's one point. The second point is that where you establish controls in states and in RFMOs, it leaves vulnerability in other areas that don't have those same controls. So it's like squeezing the IUU activity into more vulnerable areas. And coming from a very new RFMO, I say new, we were formed in 2015 and really staffed up in 2016, without a regional VMS, without observer programs, without port state measures, then we're in a very vulnerable situation. To give you an idea, the members are starting to move to correct those tools and put them in place. We're getting reporting on transshipments on an annual basis. There were 1,000 in 2015 and about 1,400 in 2017. The latter was about 337,000 tons, but the question is, were they monitored? Did we have the mechanisms in place to monitor, to see if the actual totals were correct? And then we have, as was mentioned earlier, what about the illegal activities, the illegal carriers? And that'll come out in a little bit. We have lots of tools to monitor. I mean, you've got the VMS. We should be making better use of civil societies. They've got more money than we have in most cases, and they are putting the tools in place to support us, and they're willing to give it to us for free. I mean, we should be using that information more in our strategies and liaising. We've got the Fish Eye program in Africa. We've got Pew is working on, in fact, Mark and I have been working on a few instances here later. When we put rules in place, they're only as good as they're enforced. So it's compliance with the rules that is the challenge. Another challenge we have in NPFC, we overlap our convention areas with NPAFC, IATTC, and WCPFC. And experience indicates that each of the RFMOs may believe they've got full control of transshipment, and they probably do with respect to their authorized vessels. But if a vessel or carrier is authorized in more than one region and they're doing transshipments, what are they transshipping? Do we really know if we don't have observers on board? Do we really know what is actually happening? Are they transshipping shark carcasses? Are they transshipping shark fins? Are they transshipping illegal fish, CITES type fish? We don't know if it's unmonitored. So despite all the VMS and the AIS and the VIRS, or the light tracking system, unless we have proper controls both at sea and in port, we can't really say we're controlling the transshipments. And as I mentioned, if the reported transshipments in 2017 for NPFC is 337,000 tons, that's what we do know. We know there was transshipped 337,000 tons. But 3 days ago, I received a list of 42 vessels that were tracked by Pew on AIS. and in the combined overlapped areas of jurisdiction, and none of those 42 vessels, those are all carriers, none of them was registered anywhere, as far as we can find out. They might be transiting to SPRFMO. They might be, I don't think, Felipe, I don't think you were able to find that they were on your list, and they weren't on our list. So just to give you an idea of the scope of the problem and the challenge, let's say each one of those carriers transshipped a minimum 10,000 tons, one trip. 42 vessels. And that's in addition to what we know was transshipped, which may have been unmonitored. So it gives you a scope of the challenge that we're facing. We are a new RFMO, but this is where it's sort of like all the IUU fishing seems to be squeezed into our area all of a sudden. I'm finding that I'm feeling the pressure. But we are developing the tools. One key thing that Mark just said, which is critical, we need to have better cooperation, timely exchange of information and data between the RFMOs, especially with the overlapping jurisdictions and adjacent RFMOs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So now we'll hear from two national perspectives. First, we have Juan Covarrubias, who is from Chile, please.
Buenas tardes. Bueno, ya han dicho mucho sobre lo que significan los transbordos y el impacto en la pesca ilegal. Yo quisiera contarles un poco nuestra realidad abajo de Sudamérica frente al Océano Pacífico. Nosotros en general, pese a ser un país muy marino y muy largo, nuestra pesca es bastante cerca del país. La gente sale, llena su barco y vuelve. No hay mucho transbordo, al menos de lo registrado. Pero lo registrado claramente no estaba controlado, y en ese sentido el país prohibió como norma general los transbordos, salvo que cumplan con ciertas condiciones. Y las excepciones tienen que ver con que tiene que estar clara el área de operación, tiene que utilizarse el BMS, tanto la nave que tiene el material como quien lo va a buscar y lo transporta. Tiene que estar la certificación del desembarque luego y un sistema de control de información. Todo esto apoyado de sanciones económicas que están en la ley y que ahora se van a aumentar aún más, nos ha permitido fiscalizar bastante lo que existe de transbordo, aunque cuánto realmente es lo que se nos escapa cuesta medirlo. Ahora, lo clave es que Chile parte y administra su pesca en el contexto de las ORP, y en el ámbito internacional también se requiere de regulación. Creemos que son clave las ORP, pero requieren medidas de conservación y manejo para la transferencia tanto en mar como en puerto. Y no solamente de lo que es la pesca propiamente tal, sino lo que es la transferencia de combustible, artes de pesca, tripulación, etc. La medida que nosotros propusimos y luego se aprobó en la ORP del Pacífico, tiene que ver con unas disposiciones generales para todas las naves y luego unas más específicas. Para todas las naves, lo clave es que todos los navíos que hicieran transbordo tienen que ser naves inscritas en la comisión o en la ORP. Y eso significa que tienen que ser de un país miembro o cooperante de la misma. Esto obliga a quienes quieren prestar apoyo a tener que vincularse con los registros de la comisión y que existe una real cooperación entre la bandera del navío, el estado del navío, el propietario, y la ORP. Y para lo que son los jurel y de especies demersales capturadas, existe algo aún más específico, ¿ya? Que tienen que estar, además del registro de las naves de la comisión, tienen que hacer notificaciones previas al transbordo, estimaciones, pero que parten 14 días antes diciendo vamos a tener transbordo en tal sector, y luego cuando ya es más inminente, 12 horas antes, tienen que volver a avisar dónde se va a estar. Eso permite después rastrear con el BMS y el horario. Si hay un observador, tienen que dársele absolutamente todas las facilidades para que observe todo el procedimiento de transporte, y tienen que haber notificaciones posteriores a la actividad de transbordo. Para ello tienen un plazo de 1 semana. Esto ha permitido tener un mayor control de las operaciones en el área de la convención, y creemos que al conjugar esta regulación de transbordo con otras, como son el registro de naves, el uso del posicionador satelital y una comprometida y fuerte labor de control por todos los estados del pabellón, se logra combatir fuertemente este flagelo de la pesca ilegal que afecta a la sustentabilidad de los recursos, ¿ya? Y que por impedir la generación de información suficiente para evaluar adecuadamente las poblaciones de los peces de las que son objeto. Creemos que la distorsión en la información es algo sumamente grave que padecemos en nuestro país. Eso, yo creo que dejamos espacio para preguntas, pero el grueso de la condición de pesca en nuestro país. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And finally, for the introductory portion, we have Suseno Sukyono, who is from Indonesia.
Thank you very much. It's really great pleasure sitting before you, sharing our experience about the transshipment. As some of you may be aware of that, Indonesia is taking a very strong stance against IUU fishing practices. This agenda is among the pieces of our President Joko Widodo vision of global maritime access, which is translated by Minister Susi Pujiastuti into 3 pillars of marine and fisheries governance, namely sovereignty, sustainability, and prosperity. At the end of the day, we will always talking about the prosperity. Managing IUU fishing practices, basically based on Indonesian experience, is managing people. When we are talking about IUU practices, people tend to think about the economic benefit. We learn from FAO, and we appreciate FAO for their initiative, providing us with the important guidelines, such as monitoring, control, and surveillance. This is a very good tool to improve, to strengthen our traditional enforcement. But as you may aware, Indonesia also has taken the necessary step to strengthen the enforcement and create deterrence against the IUU activities in Indonesia waters, namely moratorium upon ex-foreign fishing vessel, and followed by analysis and evaluation. So we invite people across the globe to come together to Indonesia, sitting together, exchanging views, and then we come up with a strategy, with a roadmap, how we can eliminate the IUU fishing practices. 1 year moratorium was imposed to identify the level of compliance, study patterns of behavior, and modus operandi of IUU fishing practices through analysis and evaluation. From this ANEF, we found that over 1,300 ex-foreign fishing vessels involved in IUU fishing activities, and found several of them also committed serious offenses, such as fraud, forgery, tax evasion, and transshipment at sea, to be directly brought to other countries without any proper export document. From our analysis and evaluation, we also found that transshipment is always about transparency, monitoring system, the capacity of the monitoring, about the people, political will, and the transparency, because actually Indonesia also benefited with the other organization, non-profit organizations such as Global fishing watch. And we also dealing with the specific and crucial issue, namely traceability, when it comes to the transshipment at sea. Transshipment at sea, we found facilities other crime, such as human trafficking, modern forced labor, and other human abuses. Transshipment at sea enables fishing vessels to remain at sea for months and even years, thus trapping the fishing crew on board the vessel, which leaves them vulnerable to abuses and exploitation. If you happen visited one of the fishing vessels with the forced labor, you can immediately, when you're entering the boat, entering the room, the smell, the odor. This odor comes along the way from sea to our plate. So we need also to encourage your kind understanding about what's really happening. And Indonesia has prohibited transshipment at sea under fisheries regulation. The regulation obligates Indonesian fishing vessels. So when we ban transshipment at sea, we also suffering. Our fisheries industry also suffering. But this is somehow thing that we need to take action, not only for Indonesia. You know, we are talking about the ecosystem piece. We have a plenty of fish, but fish has no national ID card. They can traveling to many countries. Actually, some countries also benefiting. So when we talk about transshipment at sea, we also appreciate and recognize the work of the RFMOs. Indonesia is active member of the 3 RFMOs, and also observer, non-parting in some RFMOs. We understand they do some good job, good work when it comes to the transshipment. They even come up with the CMM, Conservation Management Measure, which the member countries already agreed. But the problem is again about the lack of the monitoring. And the problem, not only the lack of the monitoring, the data. This is important. Actually, through this exercise, through this important forum, Indonesia would like to seek your advice and your further guidance. How developing country with such rich natural resources benefited from our exercises. We like you to support Indonesian effort. We understand the way the transshipment at sea practices at the ocean. 70% of our area is water, is ocean. Transshipment been a very important ingredient in our fishing operation. But if you cannot provide a good data, transparency, it's come to next problem with the traceability. So we need to come up with a very serious action. We appreciate the work being done by the FAO. And Indonesia basically would like to support the FAO to come up with the global guideline for transshipment at sea. You know, every RFMO, every single RFMO, as you are very much aware, they have their own specific characteristic. They have their own challenge. But we live in only one ocean, not oceans with S, only one ocean. What's happening in Indonesia, if we lost the ecosystem, the most precious use, biodiversity, one of the most precious mega biodiversity in the world is in Indonesia. And with the transshipment at sea, long-distance fishing nation, they not only jeopardize, they not only suffering Indonesian people, but also the world treasury. So we need to think about that when it comes to the transshipment. Indonesia, as I mentioned earlier, that we really concerned about the people. At the end of the day, we are talking about the people. And we have very good tools from the FAO. We have many good experts around the globe. We also would like to encourage people understand not only about the fish, but what we would like to see more is about the more comprehensive approach. We are approaching with the similar guidelines. So that's why Indonesia would like to support FAO initiative to come up with a global guideline for transshipment at sea. And I'm at your disposal for question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I had a few questions that I thought I would ask the panel because we just heard some very excellent overviews and many common themes already, but also some slightly different experiences. So I wanted to test a little bit of some of the things that I heard because there were some very interesting points raised. One of the things that struck me in seeing the results of the global survey was that when it comes to states, when it comes to RFMOs, when it comes to stakeholders, everybody said the regulation of transshipment is satisfactory. So if the sense of this survey was that the regulation of transshipment is satisfactory, but we're clearly hearing that there are gaps and needs, where is the gap? We've certainly heard that, that monitoring is one piece of that. But I'd like to ask if any of our panelists might have some ideas on why the disconnect between thinking the regulation is okay, but still the practice is creating problems. I'll throw that out to the floor. Who wants to start? Mark.
Thank you, Deirdre. I think where you start is access to information. And without access to all the information, you don't have a complete picture. And so you go forward to thinking that you have the complete picture and everything's okay. But it's about access to data and having an understanding of the complete picture and the need for that. And with transshipping as an activity, it's such a global activity in nature. In order to be able to have that accurate picture, it requires the ability to access data or share data and information between organizations or authorities so that you do have that complete picture. Otherwise, you can think you got everything covered, but if you don't have all the information in front of you, it's hard to have that full picture to actually show that you have an issue.
Yes, I wanted to give a clarification. With the global study, what we found out is that there are regulations around in countries and RFMOs, which we weren't maybe expecting to be so well with a good coverage, but it doesn't mean that they are properly implemented. So in the paper, the legal documents, transshipment is being considered, but then when it comes to monitoring and controlling that activity, this is where the main failure is found. So that's basically a clarifying note. And possibly understanding that monitoring is also in place for the legal transshipment operations. For example, there are notifications, authorizations, reporting, etc. for legal transshipment, which may work properly or not, which is another question, but also we have heard this morning about many cases of vessels not registered, not notifying, not having any authorizations. So that is a big matter. You know?
Thank you. So clearly what we're hearing is that there may be good regulations, but the implementation needs to improve. So it's a compliance issue. But it sounds like the monitoring and also reporting and information sharing are also extremely important pieces where there needs to be more robust measures in place and maybe even more consistent so that they can talk to each other. So if monitoring is such an important piece, then what are some of the best ways to do that, the most effective ways, but also the most cost-effective, recognizing that different technologies and monitoring measures can have different costs and implications. And I might address that in particular to Peter from the RFMO perspective and also to Juan and Suseno for what it's like as a national level as well.
Thanks, Deirdre. by the way, to borrow from Arnie this morning, my intent was not to be alarmist, but to perhaps be a little bit alarming with respect to the scope and of IUU fishing. There are many tools in place. Observers, human observers, electronic observers, VMS, as we've mentioned, to track vessels. The statements to the RFMOs and the reporting, the timely reporting. And Mark hit it right on the nose is there's got to be, I believe, a closer liaison, exchange of information between the RFMOs. And that's something that I'll be working on definitely in the next little while. I need all the help I can get to try and get control of the situation in our area. But there's another aspect which we perhaps don't use enough in the RFMOs, and that's the efforts, as I mentioned earlier, of civil society. I mean, we have Global Fishing Watch represented here. We have Pew that are monitoring on a regular basis fishing activities, and that information is tremendous supplementary information to what the RFMO already has. And they're willing to give it to us for free. And there have been programs that have been very successful in closing ports to illegal vessels, the Fish Eye program in Africa. And it's that exchange of information and the commitment of the members as well as the RFMOs to address the issue. Those are the key tools that we have to work with. And it's a case of bringing the appropriate ones together in the package. Thank you.
Tú preguntaste primero por las brechas. Yo creo que, bueno, hay muchas, pero nosotros hemos encontrado que todo lo que tiene que ver con perseguir lo ilegal desde el puerto y su sistema de distribución, en el fondo es muy importante y por eso estamos haciendo hartos cambios en la normativa para tener las atribuciones para poder, en el fondo, rastrear lo ilegal y llegar hasta la demanda. Ahora, lo que es mejor para el monitoreo, nuestra experiencia es el reporte y control en el puerto y desembarque. Yo te diría que todo lo que podamos hacer sin perjuicio que hay que meter más tecnología arriba de los buques y todo, pero es bastante irreemplazable, como vemos nosotros, el trabajo que se hace en cada puerto.
Thank you very much. So I think monitoring is really important based on our experience in Indonesia and the capacity to do the monitoring. But we need also to agree what kind of monitoring do we need. I'm talking about some people mention about flag state. Some people mention about the coastal state. Some people also mention about the port state. We need also to seek your further guidance and guidelines. How about the market state, the role of the market state? You can imagine that 54% of the fishing at the high seas is subsidized. 54%, meaning that only rich people can go to the high seas. We need to do something about our appetite. So this is the most important thing for us. And then I like also to come up when it comes to the monitoring system. It's about the CAT certificate and CAT's documentation scheme. And with that, I think if we can agree, we need to improve the participation of the private sector when it comes to the CAT's certificate. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I was going to pose two more questions for the panel and then see if we have some others in the room. But first, Alicia, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to add to the national and regional perspective that we just heard, that at the global perspective, I can't miss the opportunity to mention that yesterday we launched the Global Record of Fishing Vessel, transport vessels and supply vessels, and this is a great opportunity to share information at global level for transparency and traceability. And because it's public, it's not just for the states, it's also for the NGOs, for the industry, for the consumers, retailers. So at global level, I think this is one of the most cost-effective ways of controlling or monitoring transshipment, together, of course, in conjunction with PSMA and catch segmentation schemes. But I hope you understand that this is an opportunity that we should start feeding from the states with information and use it from the other side, from the stakeholders, to make it efficient in the fight against illegal fishing.
Thank you. So one thing we heard a little bit about already are the challenges where you have RFMOs with overlapping areas and fishing activity happening in that overlapping area, where there may be one set of rules in place for one RFMO if there's a certain stock involved, but maybe not for another. So clearly that's an issue that's already been highlighted by the panelists as requiring some work. But for a lot of the large-scale high seas operations, we also know that many of the transshipment vessels themselves, the carrier vessels, are highly mobile. They move freely from RFMO area to RFMO area, ocean to ocean. So how do we deal with this very challenging situation? I'm guessing part of the answer is the global record, but I'm curious if others have things to add to that.
Go ahead.
No, I think if we talk about tuna RFMOs, then there are transport vessels which are operating the world around. They are going into all areas. They have contracts with vessels, and all tuna RFMOs, they require authorization. They must, both fishing vessel and a transport vessel must have an observer on board. They must have VMS. But if they are moving from one area to another area, you have no continuity because they are coming into the area of another RFMO. They need to have another observer on board because they have a different observer company, and then you have no continuity of, and I think I mentioned the example of Thailand. Thailand has equipped its transport vessels with these cameras, with VMS, with everything, and they are controlled from port to port. So they know exactly what the transport vessel has done during its trip. And I think it's absolutely necessary to control all transport vessels from port to port. Otherwise, you don't know what they are doing outside some authorized transshipments.
Thanks, Deirdre. And just to add on to what Harry said, a couple things that are very important. One is the ability for, or the requirement for a carrier vessel to report in to an RFMO secretariat if they enter the convention area of their intent to transship in the convention area. So there's that notification up front, and that notification also provide verification from the carrier that they have an operational VMS on board and they're carrying an observer. And that notification is given up front, and that gives an indication to the RFMO secretariat that they do have a carrier that has come into their region or their convention area to conduct that activity. I think that also that while we can't downplay how effective monitoring is when you use VMS or even with AIS, you can't downplay the role and the importance of having an observer on board. And whether that observer is a human observer or whether or not you're using technology these days and you've got electronic monitoring. But because you can see a vessel on VMS doesn't mean you know exactly what is being transshipped between two vessels, how much bycatch, how much product, exactly, what the details are, without having that observer on board, whether it's a human or electronic monitoring. So I think those are two important aspects as well.
Thanks for mentioning observers. Just to follow up on that, what's more important, having observers on the fishing vessels or observers on the transport vessels, whether electronic or human? What's everyone's perspective and experience on that?
I didn't know whether you wanted to go down the line or not, but when you say what's more important, is it the chicken or the egg? I know in WCPFC, for instance, all purse seiners have to have an observer on board. And I believe it's 20% of the longliners at this time. 5%, sorry. Excuse me. I'm wishful thinking for you. But it's on both the fishing vessels and on the carrier. One has to understand that when you're doing a transshipment at sea, it can go on for quite a long time. And the observer does get exhausted, and there's a lot of things that can happen that he just doesn't see. So the more eyes on the horizon, the better. But the more transparent everything is, you know, it'll help, obviously.
See, and in my view, there should be observers on both vessels.
I would say the same thing. You know, the best possible case is have observers on both vessels. That provides the independent verification from both the offloading vessel to the vessel that's taken the product. That provides the independent verification of just how much product was transshipped each and every time that activity occurs, out of sight, out of mind, over the horizon.
También diría que en ambos buques, ahora para cómo regular el hecho de cuando sale del área de una ORP y entra a la otra, creo que es clave ahí el BMS y las cámaras de video que sean lo más transparentes posible, a efectos que se puedan colgar de ellas ambas ORP.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think food. Yeah, certainly food is important. But we are talking about the human observer on board. The human observer. It is about the availability, a number, and also the quality, the capacity of a human observer on board. You may not necessarily have in your mind still fishing vessel. You can imagine if someone has to stay on wooden fishing boat 6 months or 1 year at sea. Thank you very much.
So I think there's consensus on the panel, and Alicia, you haven't answered. You have a different view.
Just a final comment that when we talk about observers, even electronic, normally we are addressing the most legal or almost totally legal vessels. But again, there is the issue of the illegal vessels that they are not registered, nobody is following them. And what I want to point out is that the common denominator of all the vessels is that they have to land somewhere. So, of course, the electronic monitoring and the observers are a key tool to follow the catches and the transfers in the legal vessels, not so useful in the totally illegal ones. So we need to always apply all the measures in conjunction and not forget that they all have to land, and we need to be responsible for the states.
Thank you. I promised some time for some questions from the floor, so let's see if we have any. Please. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, great.
No. Oh, yes. Yes, okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Sandy Davis, Stop Illegal Fishing and Fish Eye Africa. Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. I've got a few points to make. The first one is, thank you very much, Alicia. That was a good introduction for us. What we're seeing in the Western Indian Ocean is that vessels are either on the radar, they're either essentially illegal, or they are illegal. And when they're illegal, they are dropping off the radar. They're not on VMS, AIS observers. And we're seeing this, the magnitude of it, we're not sure about. We're seeing vessels using multiple names, sharing one name between vessels, this type of activity. And we are starting to implement a solution that we hope will impact on the illegal transshipment, which is, we're calling it a system of vigilance, where the coastal states, it's a coastal state-driven initiative to check the validity of the vessels. And that is happening in ports and through due diligence, and it links to flag states. So we're hoping that by actually ensuring that the operators are legal, their vessels are legal, they will then be transshipping and falling under oversight. But then I'd like to just flag two other areas where we see great challenge, and I'm hoping that the work that's happening with the port state measures and the transparency now with the global record will help. And that is that once this illegal transshipment is taking place, the fish is then not being offloaded in the region, in the ocean region where it's being caught. It's going to other ports. And we have no system of linking up with those ports at the moment. And we're hoping that that's something that the whole global concept of the Port State Measures Agreement will enable. But this is linking up the coastal states in the fishing areas with the port states where potentially that illegal fish is being offloaded. So it would be interesting to hear if the panel has any experience of those linkages. And I think that's the port states and the market states will play a role. This is a new area. And finally, just to flag containers. We have a big question mark over the role containers are playing in this. And when actually does the fish get into the containers? And where do those containers end up? And these are the two big questions that we're hoping to tackle and that the port state measures and the market states can help us with. Thank you.
Thanks. So see if the panel has any comments on both the issue of the tracking of the things you can't track, but also the issue of container vessels, which is an interesting one because, of course, they're specifically exempted under the Port State Measures Agreement, presuming that they're not carrying fish that hasn't been previously landed. But is there any visibility on whether that's true or not? I see Peter has some thoughts.
Thanks, Adrian, and thanks to Sandy. You brought up some very good points. The one thing we have to remember is when we set all the regulations into place, and we're monitoring the good guys, the guys that want to do things properly. And as Sandy said, and I just mentioned earlier, the 42 non-registered carriers in 2016 that were in the North Pacific Fisheries Commission area, they're the bad guys. We wouldn't catch them on VMS because they wouldn't have it. And it's very interesting that they were able to be picked up on AIS. And that's because of the vigilance that Sandy mentioned that is now coming into play in the civil societies. And they're bringing up that information. The other aspect of the port states and the unloading in the market states, I'm aware of an initiative where there's cooperation between an RFMO and, I hope you don't mind, Tony, but a Global Fishing Watch, where they're providing all the transshipment or all the observer data. In fact, Pew had a hand in this as well. All the observer data to the Global Fishing Watch, and they're merging it with the data that they have, and they're able to come up with a track of that vessel and all the events throughout its course of operations. And I think this is where the monitoring is going to, and that liaison and timely exchange of information is going to really pay off.
Thanks, Deirdre. And thanks for your comments, Sandy. I also, like Alicia, can't overemphasize like you the importance of the Port State Measures Agreement and what value that does, especially the mechanisms that are in there about sharing information and sharing data. And when you ask about examples, I'm not fully aware of the specifics of it, but I am aware that there is a country in the Pacific, Republic of the Marshall Islands, with their port of Majuro, and they've set up an agreement with Thailand to where a lot of the carrier vessels that transship in the port of Majuro go direct to Thailand to offload. And Thailand provides back to the Marshall Islands information about the product that's offloaded there. It's a perfect example of sharing information, ensuring that whatever's transshipped and is unloaded onto that carrier in a port, leaving that port and going to a processing port, that processing port provides that information to show that it has on board what it left the port with what it had on board. That's a perfect example, and is what an example of just the kind of mechanisms that the Port State Measures Agreement does provide, even if that is even if those countries are not yet ratified that particular agreement. It's a perfect example of how sharing that information does provide a greater transparency.
So I saw another question here in the front.
Buenas tardes. He escuchado mucho sobre los métodos efectivos para poder tener un buen control del transbordo, especialmente en mar, específicamente relacionado con compartir información. Pero ¿no creen ustedes que también deberíamos apuntar hacia un punto previo, que es el real control que debe tener el Estado del pabellón al otorgar bandera a sus naves? ¿No deberíamos entrar en una evaluación de las directrices del Estado del pabellón, por ejemplo? Porque está bien, vamos a controlar en puerto y me parece que es una de las herramientas más efectivas que tenemos. Lo mismo el control que hacemos a través de las ORPs, con sistemas de BMS y conjugando todas las herramientas existentes para poder hacer un efectivo control. Pero no deberíamos fortalecer la capacidad y normas que tienen los estados del pabellón a otorgar bandera. Tal vez no debería otorgar bandera a un estado del pabellón que no pueda controlar sus naves. Y hablo reefers y hablo naves pesqueras. Tal vez una buena medida sería que entendiéramos como pesca cualquier actividad, sea la de extractiva y la de transbordo. No sé, hay que hacer algo, pero tal vez los estados deberían controlar más fuertemente. Gracias.
Good and provocative question, yes. Who wants to take it first? Alicia?
Sí, la realidad es que la FAO también está apoyando a los países en cumplir con sus responsabilidades como Estado pabellón. Y uno de los puntos importantes aquí no es solamente el monitoreo, que es muy importante. Una vez que uno es Estado pabellón, es responsable de las actividades de ese buque y de hacer un correcto monitoreo y recogida de información y notificación a los actores implicados. Pero también en el momento del registro, un Estado de pabellón tiene que ejercer su responsabilidad de registrar solo los buques que no tienen un historial de no cumplimiento. Y esto no siempre es fácil. Una vez es porque el interés económico de recibir los fondos por el registro y por otros motivos prevalece, pero también porque la información no está siempre disponible, con lo cual esos buques se mueven constantemente y es difícil saber si vienen legítimamente con una buena intención o si están haciendo constantes cambios, ¿no? Y aquí vuelvo a reiterar otra vez el papel del Registro Mundial de Buques, en el que un Estado pabellón puede también hacer uso del registro viendo los registros previos de ese buque y la periodicidad de los cambios. Solo quería decir eso.
Thank you, and thank you for your question. I think 2 points in with that. You speak to something that is very close to what the Pew Charitable Trust in the work of our Ending Illegal Fishing project is looking at right now, and that is trying to put together a tool, an assessment tool that flag states can use to really assess whether or not they're meeting the obligations that they have associated with the international agreements that they've signed up to. And we believe in the next year or so, once we've finalized in putting that assessment tool together, that might be one of the ways that will help flag states know and understand just where they need support or capacity building to meet the obligations they have. The other point I would make is within a lot of the RFMOs, they have a compliance monitoring scheme. And part of that compliance monitoring scheme looks at the various aspects of flag state performance in meeting the obligations with the conservation and management measures. So within the various compliance monitoring schemes, I think is another way to go as well.
Thanks. I saw many hands up, but I'm going to take them in the order that I saw the hands. So Danielle is next. You had a question?
Sí, yo lo primero lo que iba a manifestar fue lo mismo que manifestó la colega de Chile, y creo que acá hay una pata muy importante que es la del Estado del pabellón. Resulta un poco extraño que el único acuerdo vinculante es el de Estado del puerto, pero para el Estado del pabellón tenemos directrices. Entonces creo que ese tema ya ha quedado totalmente abordado. la preocupación que voy a manifestar es que creo que donde existen organizaciones regionales pesqueras o cuerpos regionales pesqueras, es un tema el del transbordo que puede ir avanzando en regulaciones y en un mejor manejo, pero la preocupación que nos queda a todos es en aquellos lugares donde hoy no hay organizaciones pesqueras regionales, donde es difícil que hayan, y para ahí lo que vemos nosotros, y es lo que queremos ver la opinión del panel, es que a lo mejor hay que caminar en FAO hacia unas directrices para el transbordo. Gracias, Dino.
Thanks for that question. So what about the areas where there aren't any RFMOs, but there's fishing and transshipping on the high seas? What do we do there? Harry?
I think the question is simple, and it is a little bit connected. It's the flag state who has to make sure that its vessels are doing their activities properly. And if there is no RFMO, then the flag state should be responsible for the activities of its vessels in international waters. And I want to add here a bit on all the questions. In essence, it is a matter of cooperation. A flag state cannot control its vessels without the help of a port state, because the vessel is entering in the port state and it needs to be inspected, and the flag state has no competence to inspect the vessel in the port state. So I think PSMA is a very logical tool to help the flag state to control properly its vessels. But then, like you mentioned, the Indian Ocean, there is very good cooperation in the western part of the Indian Ocean, but basically this cooperation should be extended to the other parts of the Indian Ocean, and it needs to be a cooperation between the states to make sure, and it would be very good if you know also some inspectors in Mumbai and Singapore and Bangkok, and that you have them also in your network, and if something is going wrong, that you can also pass on information on things which are going wrong. It is, in essence, it's a cooperation between states, and I think it will be a big challenge to make this cooperation work, but we have to do the effort to make sure that it is working.
Thanks. So I think there's time for one more question, and Michelle, you got your hand up. So sorry, this is the last one. I would love to keep going. I'm sorry. SPRFMO can wait.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. I feel like I have a lot of pressure to have it be a really important comment and question now that I have the last word. So today, the session really was about transshipment, but in fact, so many of the comments really dealt with following the vessels, following the product, following the money, following the containers, eventually following the beneficial owners, the trade processes, transparency, traceability, the whole continuum, everything. And it seems like that's one of the things that we find ourselves in this world doing. We put in one set of regs, they aren't perfect, so we go to another segment, and we try to sort of keep tightening the noose, so to speak, and we haven't really kind of done the other thing, which is scale it up and think about joining up all of these different segments of information, which perhaps the port state measures so far is the best attempt to try to get there. But it does seem like there is a need for, of course, maximizing information collection, exchange, evaluation, but it's all being done in little bits. And until sort of those silos are joined in a better way, we might not really get to where we all say we want to go. So that was a comment. The second one is really a question. And Suseno, you mentioned sort of the human trafficking element in terms of some of the problems that occur with transshipment. And it does seem like one of the things that I think all governments face is the different departments have different legislative mandates, and they can only go so far. And oftentimes, different departments have responsibility for putting together these various regulations. And so while there's certainly a need to cooperate within the region and neighbor to neighbor, there is also certainly a need to try to understand at the national level how some of these existing issues, because of legislative competence, can be overcome. So there can really be a true sort of reflection of real life when the inspectors get out there and confront the many problems that they often find. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think what we been doing so far for the last 4 years is setting up to improve the coordination among different offices in Indonesia. We understand that the fisheries management is always a cross-cutting issues. We are setting up a task force, special task force to combat illegal fishing. I think it's about altogether 13 ministry, including Navy and police, air forces, a local government, and lawyer, and also the international agencies. Because we were thinking that, I hope I can answer your question. Actually, human trafficking we cannot separate it from the illegal fishing. It's the reality. It's happening. But some people tend to think it's not our job to do that. It's other department. So who is going to solve? Some people say that the fisheries is not our job. So in Indonesia, we come up with some really challenging situation when it's come to combat the illegal fishing, but it is solved. We have quite confidence through the better coordination among different units, among different ministry. We can come up with the better fisheries governance, and so far the indicator from what we've been doing in combating illegal fishing, it's a deterrent effect. Before in the Arafura Sea at night, it's about 7,000 fishing vessels. At sea, you are very much aware. At sea at night is really dark. But in Arafura is the most rich area in Indonesia. It's just like night market. So now it's back to the dark in the positive way. And the second thing is the population, fish population. But this is not the challenge. When the fish population coming, but some people are really smart. They know that fish is a migratory species. They just lining up in our EEZ border, waiting for the spearhead. But this also, to some fishing vessel, they also employ. They also practices the human trafficking. It's still happening because of the cheap. They really want to get the cheap cost products of production. So this is the thing that human trafficking from our record is still happening, and we like to encourage people to do the more coordinative, collaborative effort. Indonesia cannot work alone. Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries cannot work alone. So that's why we are working with the many 13 different ministries. And one last thing, if I may, the most important thing of the human trafficking actually is the understanding of the origin of the forced labor, to come up with the alternative livelihood. I've been interview some of the people who are suffering as a human trafficking. They say that if they have choice, they will not ever choose working in the fishing vessel. So I think this is something that we should answer together. So anyway, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to everyone, because it's clear that we could all sit here and talk about this for at least another hour. There are a lot of other questions, and I wish we had time, but unfortunately we don't. But I did want to express my appreciation to all of the panel here for your tremendous expertise and all the information. I can sum up a few key things that I heard, at least today. One of them that underscored everything is the absolute integrated nature of what needs to be done, that it's not enough to talk about port state measures or talk about transshipment or talk about CDS, that these things are all interconnected. And we know that, but there are ways that we can make that even more of an effective reality. And the interconnectedness also comes with the information. We heard the importance of good monitoring, but one thing we also heard from everyone was the importance of information sharing between RFMOs, information sharing between states that have transshipment occurring in their waters and the ports and the markets where those products end up. So clearly there's more to be done on that. And the other key piece that we heard was the need for developing, to the extent possible, common approaches. We didn't even start talking here about the issues with smaller scale vessels that were touched on by Alicia, where you're not talking about the high seas transshipment, but the issues of vessels working together and then loading all of their catch on one vessel to take it in. That's a very dynamic situation, but it creates some of the same problems of transparency and tracking and accounting. So there needs to be some thought into how there can be common approaches to deal with this. So we obviously have much more work to do, but thanks to all of you and to the panelists for at least a good hour-and-a-half discussion, maybe to get us started. Thanks very much.